Can a war movie tell the truth when Hollywood is always tempted to make history look cleaner, louder, and more heroic than it really was? The films on this list prove that real events can be more shocking than fiction. Before we begin, please like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep forgotten history and great cinema alive. Number 19. Rescue Dawn, 2006. Rescue Dawn is based on the experience of Dieter Dengler, a German-born American naval pilot whose aircraft went down over Laos in 1966. Christian Bale plays Dengler as an energetic, stubborn man who refuses to accept that captivity will be the final chapter of his life. After being captured, he is taken to a hidden camp where a small group of prisoners survive on almost nothing while waiting for a rescue that may never come. The movie is not built around large battlefield scenes. Its war is fought through hunger, fear, disease, and the slow destruction of hope. Director Werner Herzog keeps the jungle beautiful and threatening at the same time. Dense trees hide possible freedom, but they also hide patrols, dangerous animals, and endless miles of uncertainty. A memorable scene shows Dengler secretly studying the camp and explaining an escape plan to the other prisoners. Some are too frightened or exhausted to believe him. Dengler keeps pushing because planning gives him something captivity has taken away: control. Later, the escape into the jungle becomes a desperate test of friendship and endurance. The men are free from the camp, but they are nowhere near safety. Bale's performance makes the story feel physical. He shows Dengler's charm, selfishness, bravery, and almost impossible will to continue. The final helicopter rescue is powerful because the film has made every step toward it feel uncertain. Rescue Dawn avoids turning survival into a simple victory. Dengler escapes, but the audience understands that war has followed him home inside his memory. If you are enjoying this countdown, subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss our next movie list. And tell us in the comments which true war story deserves its own film. Number 18. Unbroken, 2014. Unbroken follows Louis Zamperini, an Olympic runner who became an American airman during the Second World War. Jack O'Connell plays Zamperini as a man whose entire life seems to prepare him for suffering. As a child, he is bullied and restless. Running gives him discipline. War then takes that discipline and tests it in ways no stadium ever could. After his bomber crashes in the Pacific, Zamperini and two crewmates are stranded on life rafts. They fight thirst, storms, hunger, and the frightening silence of an ocean that appears to have no end. After 47 days, Zamperini is captured by Japanese forces and sent to prisoner camps, where he becomes the special target of a cruel guard known as the Bird. The film's best-known scene comes when Zamperini is ordered to hold a heavy wooden beam above his head. He is weak, injured, and surrounded by prisoners who expect him to collapse. Instead, he lifts the beam and stares back at the guard. The moment is staged like a victory, yet it works, because the victory is internal. Zamperini cannot control the camp, but he can refuse to surrender his identity. The movie simplifies parts of his life and leaves much of his later struggle for the final text, but its central message remains strong. Zamperini survives not because he is never afraid, but because he repeatedly chooses another minute, another breath, and another act of resistance. Number 17. The Railwayman, 2013. The Railwayman is based on the memoir of Eric Lomax, a British Army officer captured by Japanese forces after the fall of Singapore. Colin Firth plays the older Lomax, a quiet railway enthusiast whose polite behavior hides deep memories from the Second World War. His new wife, Patty, played by Nicole Kidman, slowly realizes that Eric is still living inside the prison camp decades after leaving it. During captivity, the younger Lomax is forced to work on the Thai-Burma Railway. He and other prisoners secretly build a radio so they can hear news from outside. When the radio is discovered, Lomax is punished and questioned by interpreter Takashi Nagase. The film moves between the camp and Lomax's later life, showing how the past interrupts meals, conversations, sleep, and marriage. The most important scene arrives when the older Lomax travels back to Asia and confronts Nagase at the former camp. At first, the meeting looks like a chance for revenge. Lomax has imagined this moment for years. Yet when he sees that Nagase also carries guilt and memory, the emotional direction changes. The scene becomes a struggle between punishment and release. Number 16. We Were Soldiers, 2002. We Were Soldiers recreates the Battle of Ia Drang, one of the first major clashes between American and North Vietnamese forces in 1965. Mel Gibson plays Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore, a commander who studies earlier military disasters because he knows his new air cavalry unit is entering unfamiliar territory. Before leaving, he promises his men that he will be the first onto the battlefield and the last to leave. The film follows soldiers in Vietnam and their families at home. This gives the story a wider emotional view. The battle is not only about officers reading maps. It is also about wives waiting for telegrams, young troops facing their first real combat, and medics trying to help under impossible pressure. Sam Elliott brings toughness and dry humor as Sergeant Major Basil Plumley, while Barry Pepper plays reporter Joe Galloway, who eventually puts down his camera to help carry wounded men. One of the most famous scenes comes when Moore calls for Broken Arrow, a signal that an American unit is in danger of being overrun. Aircraft rush toward the battlefield, and one strike lands dangerously close to friendly troops. The confusion shows how quickly a rescue attempt can become another threat. Number 15. Lone Survivor, 2013. Lone Survivor is based on Operation Red Wings, a United States military mission in Afghanistan in 2005. Mark Wahlberg plays Marcus Luttrell, part of a four-man Navy SEAL reconnaissance team sent to observe a Taliban leader. The mission changes when local goat herders discover their position. The team must choose whether to hold them, harm them, or release them and risk being reported. They release the herders, and soon the mountains become a trap. Radio contact fails, the terrain limits movement, and a larger enemy force closes in. Director Peter Berg films the mountain battle with harsh physical force. The soldiers fall down steep rock faces, lose equipment, and keep moving even as their situation becomes more desperate. A famous sequence shows the four men throwing themselves down the mountainside to escape. It is not presented as graceful action. Their bodies hit rocks and trees, making the landscape feel like another enemy. Later, Luttrell reaches a Pashtun village, where local resident Muhammad Gulab protects him under the traditional code known as Pashtunwali. The film has faced debate over numbers and details, which is common when real operations become movies. Still, its central tragedy is not in doubt. The mission cost the lives of Luttrell's teammates and members of a rescue force when their helicopter was brought down. Lone Survivor works best when it focuses on loyalty between individuals. Number 14. The Great Escape, 1963. The Great Escape is based on the mass breakout from Stalag Luft III, a German prisoner of war camp designed to hold Allied airmen considered difficult to contain. The prisoners decide that escaping is not enough. They want to create such a large operation that German forces will be forced to move men and resources away from the war effort. The movie turns engineering into adventure. Prisoners dig tunnels named Tom, Dick, and Harry. They hide sand inside their clothing, create civilian outfits, copy documents, and build air pumps from camp materials. Every detail depends on secrecy. One careless guard, loose floorboard, or missing tool could destroy months of work. The most famous scene is Steve McQueen's motorcycle chase. His character races across open country, jumps fences, and tries to reach safety. It is thrilling, but it was invented for the film. McQueen's character is a fictional American added to a story that mainly involved British and Commonwealth airmen. The real escape was colder and more tragic. 76 prisoners got out, but most were recaptured, and 50 were later executed on Adolf Hitler's orders. That knowledge gives the movie's cheerful surface a darker meaning. The men joke and compete, but they understand the possible cost. Richard Attenborough's Roger Bartlett represents the organized determination behind the plan. Number 13. A Bridge Too Far, 1977. A Bridge Too Far tells the story of Operation Market Garden, the ambitious Allied plan launched in September 1944. The idea was to drop airborne troops across the Netherlands, capture a chain of bridges, and open a fast road into Germany. On paper, it promised a shortcut that might end the war sooner. In reality, weak intelligence, bad weather, communication failures, and stronger German resistance turned the plan into a costly defeat. The film uses a huge cast to follow different parts of the operation. Sean Connery plays Major General Roy Urquhart, Anthony Hopkins plays Lieutenant Colonel John Frost, and Robert Redford appears as Major Julian Cook. Rather than creating one hero, the movie shows a system slowly breaking apart. Radios do not work. Tanks are forced along a narrow road. Paratroopers land too far from their targets. Commanders continue following the plan even when reality has already changed. One unforgettable sequence shows Frost's small British force defending the northern end of Arnhem Bridge. They hold buildings around the bridge while German armor moves against them. The defenders are isolated, low on supplies, and waiting for help that cannot reach them. The tension comes from knowing that bravery cannot repair a broken strategy. The title comes from a reported warning that the operation might be trying to capture a bridge too far. Whether every conversation happened exactly as shown is less important than the film's larger truth. Number 12. The Killing Fields, 1984. The Killing Fields tells the true story of New York Times journalist Sidney Schanberg and Cambodian reporter Dith Pran during the fall of Phnom Penh and the rise of the Khmer Rouge. Sam Waterston plays Schanberg, while Hying S., himself a survivor of Cambodian imprisonment, gives an extraordinary performance as Pran. At first, the two men cover the expanding conflict together. They photograph ruined towns, question officials, and try to understand a country collapsing around them. When foreign citizens are evacuated, Schanberg can leave, but Pran cannot. The journalists attempt to create false documents for him, yet the plan fails. Pran is forced into a world of forced labor, fear, and constant danger, while Schanberg returns to America carrying guilt. The film's most famous scene comes when Pran escapes through the countryside and enters a field filled with human remains. He realizes that the quiet landscape is evidence of mass death. The moment is disturbing without depending on spectacle. It shows a man walking through the physical proof of what a government tried to hide. The movie is also honest about Schanberg's ambition. He wins recognition for his reporting, but he knows Pran paid the greater price. Their eventual reunion at a refugee camp is emotional, because it is not treated as a simple happy ending. Too much has happened. Number 11. Black Hawk Down 2001. Black Hawk Down recreates the Battle of Mogadishu, fought in Somalia in October 1993. American Rangers and Delta Force operators enter the city to capture senior figures connected to warlord Mohammed Farah Aidid. The mission is expected to last less than an hour. Instead, 2 Black Hawk helicopters are brought down, and the soldiers become trapped in a long urban battle. Director Ridley Scott tells the story through movement and confusion. Streets look similar, radio messages overlap, vehicles miss turns, and separate units struggle to reach the crash sites. The film does not pause often for background, because the soldiers themselves have little time to understand the larger picture. Their immediate goal becomes simple: reach the fallen crews and bring everyone home. The first helicopter crash is the movie's defining scene. The aircraft spins over the city and disappears behind buildings as troops stare upward. In that instant, the mission changes from an arrest operation into a rescue. Later, 2 Delta snipers, Gary Gordon and Randy Shughart, volunteer to defend another crash site, despite knowing how dangerous the position is. Their decision becomes one of the film's most powerful examples of duty. Black Hawk Down has been criticized for giving limited attention to Somali civilians and politics, and that criticism matters. The battle caused heavy losses far beyond the American force. Still, as a view of soldiers trapped inside a collapsing mission, Number 10. Tora, 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 1970. Tora, Tora reconstructs the attack on Pearl Harbor from both the American and Japanese sides. Its title comes from the coded message used to announce that surprise had been achieved. Instead of inventing a romance or creating one central hero, the film follows commanders, pilots, intelligence officers, radar operators, and government officials as they move toward December 7, 1941. The Japanese sections show Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto understanding the enormous risk of attacking the United States. Officers carefully plan the carrier route, train pilots, and worry that diplomatic negotiations may fail before the attack begins. On the American side, warnings appear in fragments. A damaged submarine is noticed. Radar operators detect incoming aircraft. Intelligence messages suggest danger, yet poor communication and disbelief prevent these clues from becoming action. The attack itself is the film's famous centerpiece. Japanese planes sweep over the harbor as sailors rush to their stations and battleships erupt in smoke. The sequence uses large-scale practical effects, real aircraft, and carefully staged destruction. It feels less like a modern action scene and more like history suddenly becoming unstoppable. The movie takes dramatic shortcuts, but it remains unusually interested in procedure and responsibility. It does not claim the attack happened because one foolish person failed. It shows many small delays, assumptions, and missed opportunities coming together. Number 9. The Battle of Algiers, 1966. The Battle of Algiers dramatizes the Algerian struggle against French colonial rule, focusing on events in Algiers during the 1950s. Filmed in a rough black and white style, it often looks like genuine news footage. That realism is so convincing that the opening originally included a notice explaining that no documentary material had been used. The story follows Ali Lapointe, a street criminal who becomes part of the National Liberation Front. As resistance grows, the movement organizes strikes, attacks, and secret networks inside the Kasbah. French authorities respond by sending paratroopers led by Colonel Mathieu, a fictional character built from several real officers. He is calm, intelligent, and willing to use harsh methods to destroy the underground organization. The film's most famous sequence follows 3 Algerian women who change their clothing and appearance so they can pass through French checkpoints. They carry hidden devices into civilian locations, while the soundtrack builds unbearable tension. The scene refuses to make the choices comfortable. The women see ordinary people around them, and the audience understands that political violence reaches far beyond soldiers. What makes the movie exceptional is its refusal to offer an easy moral escape. It shows colonial oppression, resistance, fear, retaliation, and the way each side justifies increasingly severe actions. Number 8. The Longest Day, 1962. The Longest Day recreates the Allied invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944. Based on Cornelius Ryan's detailed book, the film uses a massive international cast and follows American, British, French, and German participants. Rather than staying with one group, it moves across command rooms, beaches, villages, aircraft, and ships to show how enormous the operation really was. The early scenes are filled with uncertainty. Bad weather threatens the invasion. German officers disagree about whether an attack is coming. French resistance members receive coded radio messages. Allied paratroopers prepare to jump into darkness without knowing where they will land. The film presents history as thousands of people acting at once, often with only a small piece of the full plan. One of its most memorable scenes involves paratrooper John Steele, played by Red Buttons, whose parachute becomes caught on the church tower at Sainte-Mère-Église. He hangs helplessly above the town, while fighting unfolds below, and pretends to be lifeless, so German soldiers will ignore him. The event was based on Steele's real experience, though the movie changes some details. The beach landings, airborne drops, and French commando attacks remain impressive because the film emphasizes geography and coordination. Viewers can see how one delayed unit affects another. The Longest Day is less personal than many modern war movies, but that distance suits its subject. It captures D-Day not as the achievement of one superstar hero, but as a dangerous machine made from countless human parts, any one of which could fail. Number 7. Patton 1970. Patton follows General George S. Patton, one of the most aggressive and controversial American commanders of the Second World War. George C. Scott gives a towering performance, presenting Patton as brilliant, theatrical, deeply patriotic, and often unable to control his own behavior. The film begins in North Africa, follows the invasion of Sicily, and continues through the campaign across Europe. The opening scene is one of the most famous introductions in cinema. Patton stands before an enormous American flag and delivers a speech about victory, courage, and the fighting spirit. The words are adapted from several real speeches, but the staging turns Patton into a symbol before the story begins questioning that symbol. On the battlefield, he understands movement, speed, and the psychology of command. He studies history and believes he has lived through earlier wars. Yet his confidence repeatedly becomes arrogance. The film does not avoid the incident in which he struck and insulted soldiers suffering from battle exhaustion. Public anger nearly destroys his career, and he is temporarily pushed aside while the invasion of France moves forward without him. One especially revealing scene shows Patton walking through an ancient battlefield and describing exactly where soldiers once fought, as though he remembers being there. Number 6. Hacksaw Ridge, 2016. Hacksaw Ridge tells the story of Desmond Doss, an American Army medic and Seventh-day Adventist who refused to carry a weapon during the Second World War. Andrew Garfield plays Doss as a gentle but stubborn young man. He wants to serve his country, yet his religious beliefs will not allow him to take a life. His fellow soldiers initially see this as cowardice, and his officers try to remove him from the unit. Doss survives military court proceedings and is allowed to serve as a medic. He is sent to Okinawa, where American troops must climb the steep Maeda escarpment, known as Hacksaw Ridge. The battlefield is chaotic, and the same men who mocked Doss soon depend on him for help. The film's defining sequence begins after the Americans withdraw from the ridge. Doss remains behind alone, searching through smoke and darkness for wounded soldiers. Each time he finds someone, he lowers the man down the cliff with a rope. Exhausted and injured, he quietly asks God to help him save one more. Then he turns back into danger again. Doss was credited with rescuing approximately 75 men, though he personally gave a lower estimate. He later became the first conscientious objector to receive the Medal of Honor. Number 5. Downfall, 2004. Downfall portrays the final days of Adolf Hitler's regime inside the Berlin bunker in April 1945. The story is partly shaped by the memories of Secretary Traudl Junge, played by Alexandra Maria Lara. Through her eyes, viewers enter a sealed world where maps, orders, and speeches continue, even as Soviet forces close around the city. Bruno Ganz gives a frightening and complex performance as Hitler. He can appear weak and polite in one moment, then furious and detached from reality in the next. The film does not excuse him or soften the crimes of the regime. Instead, it shows how ordinary behavior can exist beside enormous evil, making the bunker feel more disturbing rather than less. The most famous scene occurs when Hitler is told that the military counterattack he expected will not happen. He orders most people out of the room, then explodes at his generals. The scene later became widely copied online, but inside the film it is not humorous. It is the moment when fantasy finally crashes into military reality. Even then, Hitler blames everyone except himself. Above ground, civilians, child soldiers, and exhausted defenders face the consequences of decisions made below. Some leaders search for escape, while others prepare to take their families with them into death. Downfall is difficult because it refuses the comfort of distance. It shows a criminal government collapsing from the inside, surrounded by people who still obey, pretend, or remain silent. Number 4. Dunkirk, 2017. Dunkirk is based on the evacuation of Allied troops from northern France in 1940. After German forces pushed British, French, and Belgian armies toward the coast, hundreds of thousands of soldiers became trapped around Dunkirk. Christopher Nolan tells the story through fictional and composite characters, but the situation, scale, civilian rescue effort, and fear come directly from the historical event. The movie uses 3 connected timelines. 1 week follows soldiers waiting on the beach. 1 day follows a civilian boat crossing the English Channel. 1 hour follows fighter pilots protecting ships and troops from the air. These timelines meet near the end, turning separate acts of survival into one shared moment. The most famous scene is the arrival of the little ships. Soldiers on a naval vessel first see small boats appearing across the water. They are fishing boats, pleasure craft, and private vessels operated by civilians who have crossed into danger to help with the evacuation. The scene works because the film has spent so long making the trapped men feel forgotten. Dunkirk avoids traditional speeches and detailed personal histories. Its characters are defined mainly by what they do under pressure. Some act bravely, some panic, some make selfish choices. Number 3. Lawrence of Arabia, 1962. Lawrence of Arabia is inspired by the experiences of British officer T.E. Lawrence during the Arab revolt against the Ottoman Empire in the First World War. Peter O'Toole plays Lawrence as intelligent, theatrical, fearless, and increasingly uncertain about who he has become. The film begins with his death, then looks backward as others try to explain the legend. Lawrence is sent into Arabia to observe Prince Faisal's forces. Instead, he becomes deeply involved in the revolt. He crosses the desert, builds alliances among rival tribes, and encourages attacks on Ottoman positions and railway lines. His greatest early success is the capture of Aqaba. Rather than attacking the heavily defended port from the sea, Lawrence leads fighters across the Nefud Desert and approaches from the land. The charge into Aqaba is one of the film's most famous scenes. Riders race across the open landscape as the camera holds the enormous scale of the desert. The victory makes Lawrence famous, but fame begins changing him. He starts believing his own legend, takes greater risks, and becomes caught between British strategy and Arab hopes for independence. The movie changes timelines, combines characters, and reflects the attitudes of its era. Historians continue to debate its portrait of Lawrence and Arab leaders. Yet, as a study of war, identity, and empire, it remains powerful. Number 2. The Pianist, 2002. The Pianist is based on the memoir of Władysław Szpilman, a Polish Jewish musician who survived the destruction of Warsaw during the Second World War. Adrian Brody plays Szpilman with quiet intensity. At the beginning, he is performing live on the radio when explosions interrupt the music. He keeps playing until the danger becomes impossible to ignore. As German control tightens, Szpilman and his family are forced into the Warsaw Ghetto. Their possessions disappear, food becomes scarce, and daily rules become instruments of humiliation. When his family is deported, Szpilman is pulled from the line at the last moment. Survival separates him from everyone he loves. The film then becomes a story of hiding. Friends shelter him in apartments, but arrests and fighting repeatedly force him to move. He watches the Warsaw Ghetto uprising from a window and later crosses a city reduced to ruins. His talent cannot protect him, yet music remains the last part of his former identity. The most famous scene comes when German officer Wilhelm Hosenfeld discovers Szpilman hiding in an abandoned building and asks him to play the piano. Weak and frightened, Szpilman performs Chopin. The officer listens, then chooses to help him. The moment is powerful because it does not erase the wider horror or turn one decent act into an excuse for the system around it. Number 1. Schindler's List, 1993. Schindler's List tells the true story of Oskar Schindler, a German businessman who arrived in occupied Poland, hoping to profit from the war. Liam Neeson plays Schindler as charming, ambitious, and skilled at winning over powerful officials. He opens a factory using Jewish labor because it is inexpensive. At first, his concern is business, not rescue. That changes as Schindler witnesses the destruction of the Krakow ghetto and understands what is happening to the people working for him. With help from accountant Itzhak Stern, he begins protecting workers by declaring them essential. He spends his money, uses his connections, and risks exposure to keep names on the list that will transfer them away from almost certain death. The film's most famous visual is the little girl in the red coat. Most of the movie is in black and white, but the coat appears in color as Schindler watches the ghetto being cleared. Later, he sees the coat again among the victims. The image turns an enormous crime into one child he can no longer treat as a number. Near the end, Schindler breaks down and says he could have saved more people by selling his car or his pin. The survivors reassure him, but the scene refuses to let rescue become self-congratulation. More than 1,000 people survived through his factory, yet Schindler sees those he could not reach. Schindler's List is number 1 because it combines historical scale with individual responsibility. It asks the hardest question on this list. When a system rewards silence and cooperation, what does it take for one person to finally say no? Which of these true war movies stayed in your mind long after the final scene, and which important story did we leave out? These films remind us that history is not made only by famous commanders. It is also shaped by prisoners, medics, civilians, reporters, and ordinary people forced to make impossible choices. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your pick for the greatest true story war film ever made.